It's the tricks of the trade here is you press the mute button, which is the microphone, rather than the camera button. And then we can all like sort of at least see who we're talking to.
Rabbi, can I please ask you a question? Hello.
Of course, sure.
I want to know if there'll be any Megillah readings on Zoom for next week.
Okay, so.
And will there be a shiur?
We should have a shiur. I don't see why not. It's the fast of Esther, and we don't usually have lunch anyway on the Zoom.
Okay.
So I think it'll be okay. The Beth Din have sent out guidelines, and unfortunately, Zoom Megillah readings are not okay. One needs to hear the Megillah in person, and they're not allowing. Well, they're not allowing. They said halacha doesn't allow Megillah on Zoom. You've got to be present. In fact, even if a person is reading the Megillah over a microphone to amplify the voice for people who are standing around, whether it's in the shul or the parking lot or whatever, is also no good. We're not allowed to do that. So the only thing that they have said. Well, one second. We've all got problems. Let's not share them all here. But the point of the story is this: if you cannot get out, if it's a person who's incapacitated, who's not well, it's preferable that somebody should come and read the Megillah for you. So even if it means that they've got to stand outside your window and do it for you. But if that's still impossible, you should speak to your personal rabbi and the Beth Din, and they will tell you how best to do it if one has to. But it's got to be only in those sort of circumstances. Healthy, able-bodied people, we can't just use the fact that we're socially distancing or we're afraid. We should make a plan, stand outside the shul and hear it from a distance, but you've got to hear it live. Can't be on Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever.
Thank you.
I know it's not the best answer, but that's the answer.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Are you muting us?
I don't know if I have that ability. I've been trying for so long to get people muted, and I mute all. Let's see if this works.
Wait, I want to ask you a question.
Has that been done? Oh, I got everybody quiet. Look at that. In one press of a button.
Rabbi.
Yes. Oh, gosh. Yes. Somebody didn't tell her.
Do you know if the shuls are going to be extending their capacity to more than 50 as they did before to their half capacity limits?
So this I don't know as of yet, but what I do know is that most of the shuls are having multiple Megillah readings.
Sessions, yeah. Okay.
So they're having Megillah read several times during the day in order to accommodate more people. And we've also got to be aware of the fact that people will feel uncomfortable. If you haven't been back to shul and you now suddenly come into a crowd of 100 people, we're going to make people feel uncomfortable. And you've got to sit for Megillah reading. It's quite long. It's not, you can't knock it off in 5 minutes. It's quite a length of time, and you want to be able to hear. So automatically, people need to be quite close. It's got its issues.
Thank you. Thank you. I will mute.
Should we try this mute all now? Let's see if it works again. I thought I had everybody quiet, then suddenly people started talking. Okay. Yes. Okay. Right. I was thinking in preparation for today's shiur, I'm sure that we all have had experience with either parents, grandparents, and so on, who went out of their way not to speak about the past. people had certain pain that they didn't want to share with others. And I'm sure you have had it in your family and friends, and I certainly have had it in mine. There were certain things that went on, whether it was Holocaust related, whether it was just Europe related, whether it was related to the Haim, that people chose not to talk about. And I'm sure that we all have in our family histories, we have certain black holes because of that. We don't actually know. I wonder how many of us, even sitting here on this shir today, how many of us can safely say that we know everything about what our parents went through, what our grandparents went through, the names of all of those in the family who were lost in the Holocaust, how they died. We don't know it. And we understand very well the mentality that people had to try not to talk about it, to erase it from their memories, and to try and, so they were protecting vulnerable spaces within themselves when they didn't speak about it. You know, I personally, just to share a personal thought, I personally had a grandmother, my Baba, who was one of the only ones who survived, of course, in her family, because they happened to make it to South Africa in 1930. And the family, the rest of the family was wiped out in Europe in the Holocaust. Now, my Baba, for as long as we knew her, and unfortunately she passed away still when we were fairly young kids, but she never spoke at all. She was absolutely quiet. She never said much at all. The excuse was always made that she only spoke Yiddish, but she really couldn't speak a word of English. We remember that. And that was always the excuse, but she was always sickly, always quiet, half the time confined to her bedroom. And this was our recollections of my Baba. Today, we would have said that she was in a severe depression. They never said that then, and we certainly didn't know that as kids. But she was in a depression. And why was she in a depression? She'd lost her whole family. Her family had been destroyed. She even lost a child in Lithuania. They had unbearable and unspeakable losses and tragedies and difficulties. And therefore, the human condition was such that they put up barriers. They blotted it out. They didn't want to speak about it. And they certainly, and we all know it, they didn't want their children to have to bear that pain, to suffer along with them. They were doing it for so many good and admirable reasons. But because of that, we don't actually know all the details. And it's been this long, protracted history of our people, certainly over the last 70 years or so, to try and extract what people could know or did know. And yes, the Holocaust museums have done a great job, and Yad Vashem and so on, to try and pull all of this information out of people, but people were very reluctant to talk. They didn't want to speak about it. They didn't want to think about it. And there were probably two clear parts, if you wish, of the psychology or the mind that they employed in this process. And policy number one, or property number one, I guess, was that if you don't speak about it and you don't bring it to the fore, it's easier just to deal with it. You don't have to go there. You know, they often talk about that it's too painful to go there and people don't want to open wound and bring out all the pain and the trauma once again. So it's easier just to cover it over. So there's a conscious and a subconscious program that people follow in trying to deal with memories that you don't want to have, things that you want to try and forget. The Shabbos is called the Shabbos of memory, or the Shabbos of remembering, Shabbat Zachor. And we're challenged on this Shabbos to remember, not to forget, and to actually bring to the fore a lot of stuff, some of it good and wonderful, and some of it really, really painful. And to think about it and to contemplate it and to deal with it and to know what the Jewish attitude is towards a lot of these things that have affected us in history and affect us today as well. In many Sidurim, and if you look in several Sidurim, at the end of davening on a weekday and a Shabbat and Yom Tov morning, printed in the Siddur are what they call the Six Remembrances. Sheish Zichronot. There are 6 remembrances. What are those remembrances? So if we take a look at them, and I'll read them to you from a Siddur that I have in front of me. If we take a look at those remembrances, the first one is Laman Tizkor es Yom Tzeicha Meretz Mitzrayim Kol Yamei Chayecha. That you should remember the day you came out of Egypt, all the days of your life. That's remembrance number 1. Remembrance number 2 is Raki Shamar Lecha. So I'll read it in English. Beware and guard your soul, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they be removed from your heart all the days of your life. Make known to your children and your children's children on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Chorev. What's that about? What's that about? The second remembrance is about the fact that there were times in our history when we didn't behave exactly the way that we should have, and we're being exhorted to remember that as well. The third one is the one that's relevant to this Shabbos, is Zachor et asher asa lecha amalek. We read it on this coming Shabbat. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt. How he met you on the way, cut down all the weak and straggled behind you, who were weary and exhausted, and he did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God will relieve you of all your enemies around you, and the land that your Lord your God gives you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. That's the biggest one. It's like the kingpin of all the remembrances. That's number 3. Number 4 is, remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the desert. What was that about? We worshipped a golden calf, and we shouldn't have done that. The 5th one is, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. What was that about? Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, and she, although she was this great tzedekis, wonderful woman, the Lashon Hara was an insinuation just against her brother about the woman that he married. Right? That was all. She got tzaras, she got leprosy, she had to be sent out of the camp until she had done tshuva and until she repented, and she was able to then come back. And the Jewish people didn't move until she was returned to the camp. And then finally, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, taken from the 10 Commandments, remember Shabbos, to keep it holy. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, we say it in our Lachad Odi on a Friday night, the idea of remembering Shabbos. So now 50% of these memories are good memories, 50% of them at least are bad ones. Some of them speak of triumph, but a lot of them speak of some of the issues, some of the problems that we have. And what we're actually being told, I think, and the other similarity that a lot of them have, and you will have noticed, I hope, is that they actually want us to access two different parts of this thing that we call memory. And that is that there is an instruction to remember, and there's also an instruction not to forget. And I think that possibly and probably what we're being told are mirroring these two kinds of images. The image of, or the idea of, something that you just overlook and you don't remember. But a second level, so let's call it the subconscious, but then there's the conscious, where we actually say, I do not want to remember that. As I'm pointing out, that our parents and grandparents maybe did, not wanting to remember the destruction, not wanting to remember the Holocaust, not wanting to remember or remind you of what happened to their families. And Torah says, remembering these things and not forgetting them is of paramount importance to your Judaism. We need to remember the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we need to bring it to the foreground of our minds, and we need to ingest it, and we need to understand it. Why? Because every single one of these things has a rhyme and a reason. Every one of them has some kind of an underlying cause and effect that we need to understand before we can actually move on in our Judaism. So there's a debate amongst the rabbis as to whether this idea of remembrance is something that you actually have to voice, or is it something that you can just do in your mind? If I ask you now to remember something, you can go through the files in your brain and you access the memory bank in your mind and you can just remember it. So to remember where you were yesterday at this time. Some of us, I suppose, can't do that, but that's because of our ages, I guess. But you probably could, right? You knew where you were yesterday at this time. We can remember it, but you don't have to voice it. It's a different thing if I say to you, I want you now not only to remember it, but I actually want you to spell it out. Remember it and recall it and talk about it. You know, I'm often fascinated, and I'm sure you are too. I don't know if you are, I suppose, but I'm fascinated by, you know, they have a lot on YouTube, and you can access in different places, sort of police interrogations, where they've got people to remember things, you know, and they, yes, obviously, if people are clever at it, they can manipulate your mind, they can play with you, and they can actually, they've proven it, they can get people to remember things that didn't actually happen. But when you're interrogating or you're asking a witness to say something, you know, there've been tests done on classes. This was a famous one that they used to use in legal circles, and I think there was a professor at Wits University who used to do this, that they would have somebody run in while all the students were sitting there and grab something and run away. So it was pretend a ganef who ran in, for instance, and stole somebody's bag, somebody's purse, and run out. He then said, okay, now, without talking to anybody, I want every one of you in the class to write down what you saw. And while everybody was an eyewitness to the crime, you had a lot of different details, where this one said the person was wearing a blue shirt, and this one said a red shirt, where this one said it was tall, and this one said short, and this one said, people, the mind starts digesting things differently. And then when you tell the person the real story of actually what happens, or you actually show them, they recall again, oh, yeah, you know, I just didn't see it that way, and I was looking this side, and so on, etc. So the mind can play games with you. But once you've spelt it out, once you've actually spoken about it and you've said it, you've enumerated it, the memory becomes a lot more fixed in your mind. You think about, I suppose we play this game often with dreams. When you've woken up in the morning, you've said, I must remember that dream, right? I can guarantee you by 9 o'clock in the morning, you will have forgotten the dream unless you tell it over to somebody straight away. If in the morning, if you do remember it, and we don't remember all our dreams, and there are reasons why we don't, but if you remember a dream and you say it over to somebody, well, it becomes much more fixed. It becomes much more solid once you've spelt it out. So the debate amongst the rabbis was, do we have to just do this memory thing in our minds, or do we have to actually enumerate it and spell it out? Now, interestingly enough, the majority have said that all the remembrances can be done just mentally, except everybody agrees that the remembrance about amalek has to be spelled out. It's got to be said. And they chose a time to say it. And they said, while the Torah says remember, we understand that actually you've got to remember all of these remembrances every day of your life. Not always that easy, because unless we have them in print, as some have chosen to print it in a siddur, we don't really remember them every day of our lives. But then comes a time, and our sages made a firm commitment for all Jews, that on the Shabbat before Purim, we have a Shabbos of Remembrance. And on that Shabbos, we read out publicly what amalek did to us, what amalek stood for, and we have to say it, and we have to hear it, and it's got to be not just in our minds, but we want it to be in a much more fixed way. It's much more, I don't know, today they would say in your face. It's much more there for us all to look at and to see and to hear, because this memory has to be actually enumerated. It's got to be spelled out. We need to have the memory of amalek firmly in front of us. Have you ever forgotten where you left your keys? Anybody forgotten where you left your keys? It's like a famous thing. You forget where the keys are. Everybody, we forget where we left our keys. It happens to us all the time. By the way, there are all sorts of remedies for that as well, and not only medical or psychological or psychiatric, but you can. There are methods to remember where you left your keys. But if we always walked in and made a habit of hanging our keys on a rack somewhere, it would make it a little bit easier, you agree? If we put them in a funny place, so let's say it's Erev Shabbos, and you decide to hide your keys away in a drawer somewhere, but you then after Shabbos don't remember which drawer you put it in, you're going to have a hard time looking for those keys. It would be a little bit different if you made a big sign and you said, I left my keys in the third drawer of my dressing table, and you put that sign on your mirror. The sign will remind you where you left the keys, right? So sometimes we can remember, but sometimes we need signposts to make us remember. Sometimes we need reminders to make us remember. Now, guys walk around, men walk around every day, hopefully, with something on them called tzitzit. And the tzitzit, we're told, are reminders. Where do you think they got it from? That if you want to remember what you've got to do, you tie a knot in a handkerchief or something. You remember those old baba mices, right? If you tie a knot in the handkerchief, you're definitely going to remember. All you're going to remember is there was something to remember, but you might not remember what it was that you have to remember. Here we're told, in a very, very beautiful way, that tzitzit are an actual reminder, and it comes from the paragraph in the Shema, which speaks about tzitzit. And it says, Uzachartem et kol mitzvot Hashem. We've got to have the tzitzit to remember all the mitzvahs that God gave us. And therefore, the design of the tzitzit is in such a way that if we take, our sages tell us the word tzitzit, and we look at it in its numerical value, tzaddik is 90, and yud is 10. And then tzaddik is 90, and yud is 10. So far, we're up to 200. And the letter tov at the end of the word tzitzit is 400. We're up to 600. And there are 8 strings, so we're now at 608, and there are 5 knots, 613. When you take hold of a tzitzit on the corner of a talis, of a tzitzit beged, of our garment, it reminds us of the 613 mitzvahs, because the 613 mitzvahs are encoded in it. So if you want to make a knot to remember something, surely the knot has to be in a way whereby it's an actual reminder. But we understand that if we have the reminder, it's much easier to remember. So on this Shabbat, before we get to Purim, we are reminded of Amalek. And it's a reminder that we have to take seriously. It's not a reminder that's just in a way whereby we are remembering, but it's actually there. It's as though you've put a notice on your mirror that you remember in which drawer you put the keys. It's reminding us as well to remember. Why did they choose to do this on Shabbat? Why can't we remember or have this reminder on any other day of the week? Why does it have to be on Shabbat? Well, there's a beautiful answer that's given. And that is that one of the remembrances, of course, is about Shabbat. Shabbat itself is a time for remembrances. Shabbat is something we have to remember as well. Shabbat itself, Shabbos itself, is a remembrance. And therefore, our sages said that if we are involved already in a time of remembrance, we're activating the brain power to remember. We're tapping into the memory bank that's contained within each and every one of our minds, hopefully. We're tapping into it. And at that time, let's remember amalek as well. While you're accessing the memory bank, remember that as well. What is it about amalek that we actually have to remember? Start off by saying, remember amalek asher koracha baderech. Amalek happened upon you on the way. What did he do, Amalek? And why is Amalek regarded as the most sinister of all our enemies? And by the way, the reason why it's in close proximity to Purim is to remind us that the story of Amalek keeps on coming back to haunt us. And Amalek comes back in the form of Harmon. And Amalek came back in the form of Hitler, Yamach Shmoi. And Amalek keeps on coming back in the form of all those who are anti-Semites and they don't even know why. Because of jealousy, because of some deep-rooted spiritual reason that we cannot fathom or cannot really understand, Amalek keeps on attacking. And we've got to remember that this is something that doesn't only come in the form of a man called Amalek or a marauding army called Amalek's men that come along armed with sticks and stones or guns and tanks, but Amalek comes in the form of a way of thinking. And this is what it says, Asher koracha baderech. Asher koracha baderech means he happened upon you on the way. Amalek attacked us when we had left Egypt and before we got to Mount Sinai. The Jewish people were at the pinnacle of their success. They were at the full strength of everything that they had. They had gotten out of Egypt. We had crossed the Red Sea. The nations of the world were Googling and looking on CNN and Fox News and whatever. And everybody said the Jewish people are really, really, really hot stuff. They are the be-all and end-all of this world. Look at what God did for them. Look at how they got out of Egypt. Look at how they got across the Red Sea. And Amalek said, you know what? We're going to teach them a lesson. You're not so great. And you're on your way to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. Just for the fun of it, we're going to block you. We're going to battle you. We're going to throw stuff at you. We're going to try and kill some of your stragglers. Amalek was a terrorist or a terrorist movement. They didn't care about the stragglers, about the weak ones. That's after who they went for. That was Amalek. But Asher Korcha Baderech is read really in the way of kar, meaning cold. Amalek comes along in a cold, dispassionate attack against the Jewish people, against each and every one of us. That's what Amalek does. Amalek is a cold attack, icy attack. Now, it's not that he throws ice at us, but he certainly does pour cold water all over our enthusiasm. I've been thinking about the coming festival of Purim this year, particularly in light of the fact that it was really, in the Jewish calendar, it was Purim last year, that this whole pandemic really blew up in our faces in the most awesome and terrible way. And people have lost their lives, and people have got sick, and millions of people around the world have been panicked and stressed out, and the entire world has been in a shutdown, in a lockdown, and lives have been deeply damaged and affected. And it all began round about Purim last year. And if we think about it, there are more images of coronavirus that can tie up with Purim. I mean, let's just think about the fact people have joked about it, but at Purim time, people wear masks. We dress up. And this mask wearing has become something that, believe it or not, we've been doing now for a year, a full year. I don't know about you, but I find it particularly irritating. You wouldn't know what it's like to have a beard just to add to all of this this problem. It's the most uncomfortable thing to have a mask on top of it, and then try davening for a few hours as a chazan, either on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or even during the week, or on a regular Shabbos with it. It's very, very disconcerting, very debilitating. It doesn't feel good and nice and whatever. Masks were related or relative to Purim, and for a number of different reasons. But there is so much connection with Purim that one cannot overlook it. There's got to be something that Torah, that Yiddishkeit, that Judaism is trying to teach us along the way, in how we process it all and how we think about it, and what this whole year has meant to us, and now how we approach Purim this coming year. One of the things that I think that people have spoken about a lot is, and you will have heard this expression as much as I have, and each time you hear it, it's sort of, I don't know if it irritates you as much as it irritates me, but they talk about the new normal. The new normal. Get used to it, my dear. This is the new normal. Get used to it. Get used to the fact that this is how life is going to be, not only for this year, but for next year and the year thereafter and whatever, until everybody's inoculated. And then if they get the wrong inoculations, you'll have to get another one. And but this is the new normal. The story of Purim, if we really think about it, means we can't accept the new normal. The story of Purim, really, if ever there was an occasion that spells this out, we're talking about the fact that the Jewish people got used to the environment of the diaspora. They said, we're in Golus, we're in Babylon, we must get used to the new normal. We must do what the Persians are doing. We must become more Persian than the Persians themselves. And we must show that we comply with everything, the mores of their society. And if Harmon says, bow down to me, you bow down to him. Why? It's the new normal. The new normal means that you don't have to give an inkling or an iota. You don't have to give a care or a whim or a fancy for your Judaism anymore, because now we're involved in a new normal. And we've got to go along with everything that is going on around us in kind of a blind way and with a blind lack of faith, rather than blind faith. So what I'm really referring to, what I'm really thinking about here is that it's a battle, and we've spoken about it before. It's a battle to get people to come back to shul. Part of it, very valid, very, very valid points. When people are not well and people are afraid and you don't want to expose yourself to other people who may be carrying this terrible illness and you don't want to get sick, all valid, readily understood, and to be credited and encouraged. But a huge number of people have become used to the new normal. And that new normal is that it's easier to daven at home. On a Friday night, you don't have to get dressed. You can wear your pajamas or your short pants or whatever it is, and you can, in the privacy of your own boudoir, which was an expression used by my former lecturer at Wits University, Professor Arnheim, used to say, in the privacy of your own boudoir, you can sit there and you can be anything, you can do anything, and you don't have to have kind of a Shabbos atmosphere in your house, because the new normal is we just sit around, we don't anymore have this pressure of having to go to shul, and we don't have the pressure of having to get dressed up, and we don't have the pressure of having to, ladies, put on makeup, do your hair. A lady I heard, in fact, a niece of mine was talking about it in Israel. She said, she doesn't remember the last time she put on a sheitel. If you're a sheitel wearing woman, you don't need to wear a sheitel. You know why? Because you're at home. You can always walk around with a duki on or a tichel or whatever. You don't need to wear a sheitel. So we can get very used to the so-called new normal. But that, I think, is the very idea behind Shabbat Zachor and Purim per se. That we cannot become new normaled. We can't become complacent. And if we think about it, it was the footsteps of Amalek that led to Asher Korcha Baderech. He taught us about how to be cold and dispassionate. So you get a plea that says, join this campaign or help with something or get involved in something or whatever. We say, no, the new normal is that I'll use every excuse in the book, including the fact that I just don't feel like it, to stay in my complacent, home, silent, quiet, private environment. Why? Because that's the new normal. And while it may be something that we've got to do, as we mentioned before, because somebody's not well, or because we're old, or because we've got all this terminology that we've learned, this comorbidity, or because we're just really psychologically afraid, we've got to be careful that there's not an overlay of complacency and of coldness and of couldn't care less and of complete dispassionate behavior that has crept in and that's overridden all of these decisions that we're making as we go along the way. That we've got used to the new normal. So why did Amalek attack us before we came to Mount Sinai? The possibility is Amalek attacked us because we were becoming complacent. Because we believed that now that we've gotten out of Egypt and God has fought all the battles for us, there's nothing for us to do. We're actually going to go our merry way to Mount Sinai. We're going to be given the rich reward of the Torah, and everything is going to be fine and dandy for the rest of our lives, and we have to do nothing. And maybe amalek came along to remind us that in 1 second, there are battles to be fought. There are things that you've got to do, and you've got to pull yourself out of your complacent status quo kind of environment, and you've got to get up and you've got to do something. And if you're not going to get up and do something about anything, and you're going to be complacent, and you're going to be cold, and you're going to be dispassionate, unfortunately, you're allowing amalek to continually win this battle. And it wasn't only amalek who was able to do that, but Harmon in the story of Purim. We often throw this out, but think about it. Why did Harmon want to kill the Jewish people? In fact, the entire Jewish people bowed down to him. They went along to Achashverosh's party. They got involved in the merrymaking, which was, by the way, a merrymaking celebrating the overthrow of Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash and the conquest of the Jewish people. But they went along to it. They said, you know what? This is a new normal. We need to be involved in this new normal. We need to be involved in that society. Harmon says, bow down, we'll bow down. Achashverosh says, come to the party, we'll come to the party. He says, eat, we'll eat. He says, participate, we'll participate. Who cares? We'll go along. And that's, in inverted commas, the new normal. Mordechai is the only one who stands up and says, yes, we can live in that society. And of course, yes, we can obey all the rules as far as they affect us. And we have to. We have to go along with the requirements of whether it's vaccinations or whether it's wearing of masks or whether it's social distancing. Of course, we have to do all of those things. It's going to affect our health, but we've got to be very, very careful that we don't push it that far, that now we become so engrossed with the new normal that we forget about, in inverted commas, the old abnormal. We forget about the fact that we've got a Yiddishkeit to fulfill. We've got Chagim to celebrate, and we've got Shabbos to celebrate, and we've got things that we dare not forget and things that we have to remember. And we sometimes can just do it, and sometimes we need timely reminders. We need the reminders to come along and to tell us, hey, listen, if you don't shape up, you're going to be shipped out. If you don't get involved in an active level about remembering something, you're going to forget. So let's remind you. And that's what this Shabbos comes along to remind us. Let's remind you that amalek complacency is not the way to go. You've got to stick to the protocols and you've got to keep to all the things that are demanded from you, absolutely. But to get caught up in and allow complacency and a dispassionate approach to your Yiddishkeit, to your Judaism, to your Torah and your mitzvahs, to creep in, we're on the proverbial hiding to nothing. And we're going to blow out from a Jewish point of view, God forbid. And it's going to be so much more difficult to get back, if ever we can, get back to remembering the right things and not forgetting the right things. We've got to do all of that. It's part of the way we approach, and we have to approach our Yiddishkeit, our Judaism. So you see those remembrances, a lot of them are painful. A lot of them are difficult. But we've got to remember what we did wrong. And we've got to remember also what we did right. We've got to remember the positive stuff, and we've got to remember the negative stuff. And we dare not forget. When Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph interprets the dreams for the butler and the baker, we record there that the butler, Sarah Mashkim, is returned, the Torah tells us he's returned to his place in the king's palace, and he's once again serving the king. He's once again involved in his job. He gets his position back. And the Torah says he didn't remember Joseph. And it concludes and it says, Vayishkacheyu, and he forgot him. Surely if he didn't remember him, he forgot him. If he forgot him, he didn't remember him. Why does it mention it twice? So we say once again, And this is where we actually get it from. We say once again, he forgot him. He didn't remember. He forgot where he put the keys. But not only that, vayishkachehu, he made an effort to forget. He didn't want to remind himself of the fact that he was in prison. He didn't want to remind himself of the fact that he had to come to a little Jewish boy to interpret his dreams. He didn't want to remember it. He tried to blot it out of his memory. And Torah tells us here we actually have to do both of these actions. There's got to be a continual remembering, and we need to bring it uppermost into our minds that we push the memory to remember and to spell it out, because it's the only way that we'll be able to not only share it with our next generation, but carry it forward in our own lives as well. So that's actually what we do on the Shabbos. The Shabbos of Zachor, when we remember Amalek and we don't forget Amalek and what he did to us. We remember that we've got to be passionate. We remember that we've got to be feisty. We remember that we've got to fight the right battles. We remember that we've got to keep to our Torah and our Yiddishkeit. Remember that we've got to keep our Shabbos. Because if we forget that stuff, and if we think about it, I mean, I don't know, this is also something that I've been thinking about lately. But think about how in the past, just this thought, how in the past Jews had to fight to be able to daven with a minyan. That Jews had to fight to be able to hear a Megillah read. That Jews had to fight, whether it was in Russia or it was in Nazi Europe or it was in the Holocaust or it was in the death camps, that they had to fight to be able to celebrate Shabbos, that they had to fight in order to have that happen. We're not in that position, but we cannot say that, you know what, the shuls are negligible and the public or whatever, so, you know what, I'll do it next year. No, there needs to be some kind of an effort. And so to get back to the questions that were asked right in the beginning, we've got to make sure that we hear the Megillah on this Purim. And even if it's a bit of a fight, and please don't compromise anything from a health point of view. That's not what I'm saying here. But if there's got to be a little bit of a fight in order to make sure that we get to hear a Megillah, whether it is in one of the Megillah readings at your shul, or whether it is that we arrange for somebody who knows how to do it to come and to read the Megillah for you privately. But we've got to remember that these things are valuable and important parts of our Yiddishkeit. Let's not be accused of not remembering or of pointedly forgetting, trying to go out of our way to find every excuse why we can't. So yes, speaking to somebody yesterday, so he says, you know, like he's booked a holiday. It's the first time that he can get away, and they booked a holiday and they didn't realize it was Purim. And they're going to be in some place in Yahupitz, you know, like, so I'll hear the Megillah next year. You know, God forbid that we should be adopting such a complacent attitude towards the things that people have died for, that people have fought for. We fought the battle with Amalek so that we could get to the Torah. We fought the battle with Amalek so that we could get to Mount Sinai. Battles have been fought throughout our history. Let's dare not forget. Let's not forget. Let's dare not forget the hardships, but let's also not forget the kindnesses that God showered upon us. He gave us Shabbos, and Shabbos is a time of remembering. Let's remember everything that is important about our Yiddishkeit, about our Judaism. Finally, on Sunday, at 6 p.m., there's been a call that's gone out around the world. I'm sure you've seen it. If you haven't, let me know and we'll send it to you. There's been a call that at 6 p.m. on Sunday that you should say a special prayer for Mashiach. Now, interestingly enough, this is not maybe deemed to have been a Chabad campaign. It's a campaign that was started in America and in Israel completely by non-Chabad people and getting the endorsements from people all over the world. But it works out 6 o'clock in Jerusalem and 6 o'clock on South African time, therefore, 6 p.m. Sunday evening, say a prayer for Mashiach to come. You don't have to join any Zoom class. You don't have, there's no link. It's not about going on to the internet to have to see anything, but just wherever you are at 6 o'clock, put a notice now on your mirror so that you remember 6 p.m. Sunday, because I remember that's the way that you're going to remember, right? You won't remember where you put the keys. Put a notice on your mirror that says 6 p.m. Sunday evening. Remember to say a prayer for Mashiach. And there are printed prayers, but you don't need to actually say anything other than to say, Hashem, God Almighty, thank you for your brachas. Thank you for all your wonderful things. And now, please help us. And remember your promise that Mashiach is going to come. Make sure that Mashiach does come. We're looking forward to a world of peace, and we're looking forward to a world of happiness, and we're looking forward to a world where there are no pandemics, and we're looking forward to a world where there'll be harmony and togetherness and achdus and so on. What better way than to start with something that hopefully we can get, or everybody can get, thousands and thousands of Jews around the world to daven for Mashiach at exactly the same time, 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. So let's remember, let's not forget, and let's make sure that this is the weekend where we access the memory banks and we bring it to the fore. And hopefully in that way, we will not only be able to march forward in the week, but we'll be able to enjoy the coming of Mashiach, where once again, we will be able to see everything in its right light, in the correct way, and we'll never, ever forget, and we'll always remember. I wish you a great week and a good Shabbos.
Amen, and good Shabbos.
Yeah. Good Shabbos, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.
Thank you,
Keep well,
Rabbi
everyone.
Katz.
We will have a shir next week, even though it's the fast of Esther. As we said, no lunch will be served.
And if you are having lunch, put your video off.
Take care. Keep well.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Good Shabbos to everybody.
Good Shabbos.